And opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Okay. I'm just double checking my mixer. Say hey, John.
Hi.
Okay, that looks like that works. I've got all my little oppy things happening in the stream there. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Brian. This is our Friday stream. Do not adjust your screens. I control the horizontal and the vertical, and I have a guest with me this week. Very spur of the moment for me. It was one of those things where somebody had said, hey, I've got a thing and I'm doing this on YouTube. And I was like, hey, would you like to come on and talk about these things? And, thankfully John was kind enough to take time out of his day, being Friday, however, to come in and do that for us. So, thanks John for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it.
So John, as I am fond to do of our podcast, from our podcast and doing interviews, I ask people where they're from, their origin stories, and I'd like to find out where you come from. So, how did you get into InfoSec? What makes you what currently drives your passions for InfoSec and all that?
Yeah, sort of a long and interesting journey. I started in the Army by doing radios, and one of the things that I learned is how to put together very complicated systems and then be able to talk over them. And after I learned how to do radios, I learned how to do networking. And after I learned networking, I did audit, and then I did system engineering for some of our communication tools. And that led on to a very interesting career across all aspects. I had worked in operation centers and penetration tests and defenders. I worked in the DC area for a little bit. I worked at the White House. And then I also worked with some of the large intelligence agencies. And then after that, I kept ending up in this position where I would end up supporting some sort of audit or working with assessors. So that drove me to understanding more than just how to use the machine, but also be able to show it to somebody who comes in and says, well, can you show me that all these things were configured?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Do we have time to talk about the White House? You worked in the White House?
Yeah. And I was at Camp David, which is the retreat. We supported the president, and we also supported the first families. So we would go and support their travel or whatever their mission needs, or if somebody were coming to Camp David for the administration I was there for, they used Camp David for senior official retreats. So it was a lot of preparation and making sure that computers and phones worked.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was an orographer's mate in the Navy, and one of the plum jobs was Camp David, because you had to do weather observations and stuff for that, obviously, because POTUS is going to come in, or the POTUS family. And I look back at that now and I'm like, that wasn't so much plum duty. It was probably like very stressful being on the East Coast. I was a West Coast sailor, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. But that's very cool. Very interesting background you've had, even though you were in the Army. No, I'm just kidding. I love all the armed forces equally, including the Space Force. So yeah,
right. All new one.
Yeah. So what is it you do currently? You said you mentioned some contract work before we started. You're working as a contractor, but what industries are you in right now?
So I started my own business, and I'm making compliance tools for teams, right? I'm trying to help teams understand how to integrate that risk management framework, right, as a first starting point, and really, go back and understand what needs to be done, and not everything is as critical or as important as we think. Security is just one aspect of a whole business. Right.
So you mentioned doing some pen tests. I don't know if you're doing that now, but a lot of doing pen tests or working with businesses is, managing risks and creating. And I worked at a couple of consultancies doing various things. One of them was auditing hospitals, and one of the going in and I was the pre-audit, so I would come in to make sure that they didn't suck before the actual audit from the Office of Civil Rights, which is what HIPAA used to go through and do those audits for those things. So getting over the hump of, hey, I'm your friend. So, it's okay. I'm like your priest or your lawyer. So you can tell me the ugly things because it's my job to help create those and I think that's what we see with bringing in like third-party pen test firms. It's like, sometimes we need those third parties to come in and tell us our baby is ugly because the blue team is like, I've been trying to tell y'all this baby is ugly for hours, years, decades. And, now it takes a $50,000 pen test to tell us, the exact same thing I've been trying to tell you. And I wish we were better at that, but yeah. So for those of you who listen to the audio podcast, I'm going to do a little bookkeeping here. So thank you. So Bloodbound asked a question: were you responsible for making the phone work in the White House so the president wakes up in case of an emergency or waking up at 7:15 a.m. every day?
There's a whole separate team, but yeah, actually on phones, I had to configure phones, and that was a level of work that you don't think about that, and so in essence, yes.
Wow. Okay. So I'd like to thank our good moderator, Lady P, for gifting us some bits for finding value in our stream and our discussions here. And if you are interested in also supporting us, we have a Discord, discord.gg/breaksec. And you can come and hang out with us over there and talk about things. I think we were hunting the rare haggis and a bunch of other things, but we do talk about security from time to time. So John, one of the reasons we had you on was you're starting a YouTube channel. It is it's new enough that you have 10 subscribers that I see so far, which is awesome.
Hey, that's another gain. I had 9 when I sent it. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah, so you can go check that out. He'll, I will, if he hasn't gotten his vanity tag by the time the podcast comes out, we'll get him his vanity tag or his custom URL. Bloodbound says you might have 11 in a second here. So, yeah, there you go. He's got somebody in his head that is going to also subscribe. I don't know. But yeah. Oh no, we have 2 viewers. That's why. Okay. I'm sure we have some lurkers too, but that'll work out. So, so you're really interested in risk management. Why is that? I mean, some of the things you were talking about was like also with setting up policies and things, but why are those things so important to you as a consultant? Businesses should be worried about these policy things, not necessarily you. So why do policies and risk management try to keep you up at night?
It's because computers are just code. And if you write a good policy, you can start to leverage automation. And if you really structure the resources you have and you can say, this is an information system, it can actually do more for you than, there's just a share drive with a lot of folders in there. Right. So like I spend a lot of time tagging the work that I save. And even though it might take me 3 or 4 minutes to write those tags, I now have all of my resources and I can more quickly find something. Not everything is the right fit for every conversation. So sometimes you want to show something and just say, hey, like read this article.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we were talking about, so a couple of the videos you have on your site includes one called 7 Steps to Better Cloud Policies. You also have one called 7 Steps to Just Better Policies in general. So why do you think that cloud policies suck, or why do you think policies suck? What are some of the big things that companies forget when writing policies?
They forget how to make that policy work at just the minimum intended purpose, right? Where we get misconfigurations is when somebody doesn't know that second or third layer that they have to configure when they're putting something together. So where I'm focused about policies is making sure that policy is then mapped to a control and you have an understanding of why it was selected. Uh, as I put this together, I learned that there's 96 privacy controls that do all three security objectives. So right there, companies or businesses, anybody really, right? They need to focus on those 96 and not all 1,200 of that risk management framework.
Right. Right. So you're mentioning mapping policies to specific controls. What happens if they don't have compliance requirements? I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but sometimes you'll make a policy that doesn't have a legal requirement or what have you. And I think maybe is a procedure a policy that doesn't have a legal backing?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close. I think, yeah, a procedure, you could say, okay, we're not going to enforce this to some legal component, or there's not some vulnerability there that's making this a requirement. Um, really those policies should focus on those fundamentals. You've got separation of duty, you've got logging on people's activity, really you should have a logging, monitoring, and alerting program. And until those are established, you're not going to be able to do anything else with information security, no matter what tool you buy.
Mm,
You could buy the best SIM in the whole world, and if it is not receiving logs, it can't do monitoring, and it's never going to alert you.
right. Right. Yeah. So what makes up a good policy, or in this case, a non-legally backed or compliance-backed procedure?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's about making sure that there's identity access management with what somebody's doing, and really spending the time and figuring out what system they need to use, right? It's sort of like one of those things. Just because you have a network, everybody doesn't need a backstage pass.
Right.
So scoping in those restrictions, right? We if you think about how a company might have worked in the 60s or 70s with all the paper and storage, right? We had a place where a company would keep those locked up, and then maybe 5 or 6 people would have that key, and there's that component. And when you have a digital system, it's so easy to just say all the files are there, and that can over leverage your security of what information you're storing.
Right. Right. So from my days of having to deal with hospitals, that when I was trained with the CEO of the company I was working with, because there was like 9 people at the time. This is how small this organization was. He had taught me that there was really a triangle for this, not like the CIA triad, if you will, but it was like it was basically trying to get to the meat of the problem. And it was, what does the policy say? What does management think the policy says? And then what is actually being done in this case?
Yeah.
And sometimes this one doesn't do what either one of the other ones are saying, or management assumes that this is what's going on, and they actually don't know the policy either. I've run into more than one time where it's like somebody assumes that something is being done according to X, and it's not. And I've run into a lot of problems like that. So you're talking about, so do you have so I didn't watch those videos, the 2-minute videos, which is actually a great idea, having little bite-sized trainings or videos for various items. What were the high points for like building better policies for you? What were the 7 things that, the 7 steps on that, in terms of better policies?
So the first one is to define the security policy that the organization is going to follow, right? Just at a high level. What is it that, okay, we use an IAM solution and we're cloud-based and we're going to manage our organization like that? Or are we an on-premises organization and we're going to manage our identity the way that we choose? Whatever that is, there's a cause and need for both of those, and they're equally as important. But I think and then that next part is define what a vulnerability looks like to your business. Because if you don't know, like, anything could be vulnerable, right? We see all sorts of vulnerabilities come out, but if that vulnerability requires 3 or 4 other things to be compromised, or you need 3 or 4 levels of access to exploit it, it's mitigated by how deep that vulnerability is. So, if it's something that's on your domain controller and you can access it from a ping, well, that's probably an important vulnerability everybody needs to know about, right?
Right.
If you have a misconfiguration in Java that is, could potentially cause a problem if these conditions were right, that's probably not where you need to take your dev team or your engineers to work on, right? You can mitigate that by obfuscation or moving it out of a critical process, or a myriad of components can solve that problem.
Right. Okay. So I hate to go back and ask about definitions, but in your case, you mentioned vulnerabilities as being, a specific way of doing things. Do you consider vulnerabilities to be risks that are realized, or are these unrealized vulnerabilities? Like, I see that you have an unpatched system. That is a risk that is realized because, DDoS is possible or cross-site scripting is impossible. For you, what is a vulnerability versus, say, a risk or a threat?
You know, I'd like to talk about consequence because I think it brings all of those together. And I think if it's one of those, what is the consequence of this exploit? Again, if it's in your password chain, your identity access management, like that's a larger problem. If it's something that like this might not work with Internet Explorer, well, that's a different problem, right? And
Right.
that's where you could go back and really say, okay, our user base is, let's say you have some older system, right, where it is using legacy equipment, then that could change what the consequences are, right? Oh, none of our customers can use it right now. We really need to fix it. So I think consequence is a better term to kind of bring those three different components together. Like, what's the consequence of leaving your car unlocked all night? Tonight, it might not be a problem, right? But
Right.
eventually, somebody might say, "Is the door unlocked?" Right?
Right.
And that's, I think, a better approach.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of what I work with at my job, it's, we have issues that are super high issue, and it's like we're very risk adverse, but then it's like, oh, well, this is a vulnerability, and our security people are like, yeah, patch that thing. And I'm like, look, if this actually happens, it affects one system or one device,
Yeah.
and they'd have to go through the whole process again to get this one and this one. And it's like, you know, they make it faster, but the impact is one device gets hurt, instead
Right.
of,
Right.
if you could take down the whole fleet of devices
Mhm.
in one hit, that's a bigger impact for me than a one or two device. Or
Absolutely.
and I think I don't think we communicate that well enough. So, like, the open SSL vulnerabilities or things that come out that get names or some shit like that. It's like, I don't think they take into account impact. I know the CVSS scores are supposed to, but they also have
Mhm.
a fancy ass UI where you're supposed to go in and, adjust that accordingly. And I haven't gone in and done those things. I just go to the management and go, oh, look, it's a 10. It's a 10. It's
Mhm.
bad. We need to fix it. Never
Right.
mind that, the technology for it's 3 layers deep, like you said, and it's going to take, two-factor auth, and is it a bastion host and all these things to get in. Um, I use the 10.0 as the scare, the FUD to make that happen. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, um, all right. So, uh, are there good ways to write policies? You said matching them to controls that you have, or best practices. I'm sure that if they're not required by compliance, but do you have any hard and fast rules when you go into a company and you say, "Hey, I'd like to see your incident response plan"? They're like, "Yeah, we'll get that to you in a couple days," and you realize, well, they don't have one. And so they're having to spend time on the back end hiding from you, pumping out a quick IR plan, or they're Googling, IR plan template, and they're just going to change the name on top and put their name in and call it good. I mean, what do you suggest to companies when you go in and you say, "Hey, let me see this policy or this procedure, this process or whatever," and it's like they don't have it? Do you suggest to them, "Hey, this is how you should write it," or do you have some templates, or how do you do those things?
So what I like to do is understand what the organization thinks is a problem first, right? Because
Right.
oftentimes we can see things that they don't know just from being an external observer. And then I like to have questions with teams and say, what is it that you work on? And if it failed, what other events would happen, right? Like if your computer failed, is it going to be the end of the world? No, you log on, it's in the share drive or whatever that is. but understanding what system somebody works on, and then they might say, when this goes down, two other things are going to be unable to access it. And that's where you say, okay, who are those people? Where do they work? How is this connected? And is there a recovery? Do you have a backup? Have you exercised this? And those questions are just as good, right? I think that incident response plan is a component, but I think
Right.
the incident response plan, when on my website I put up digital resources, and response is almost all organizational. It's the communication to customers, stakeholders, employees, uh, anybody else that's going to be involved with it. And so much less of the response comes from the actual teams themselves, because the organization has to set that tone, and you need that leadership, that management, which are generally can be two different people, to really understand how do we do this, right? And we see breaches all the time, right? And I think what is interesting is we say, oh, LastPass was breached, but they're coming out with their messaging as soon as it happens. They're identifying what happened, and they're identifying that they're going to make changes without disclosing their super strategy, right? They're keeping that in the
Yeah.
pocket.
Are they?
Uh, well,
Yeah.
but
No, I mean,
it's what,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
There's a whole separate side of that conversation too.
yeah. I've ranted about that on the stream a little bit. It's like, yeah, we have a really great plan to fix our stuff. We fucked up.
Yeah,
Sorry, we won't do it again. And then there's a bump in your stock price.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it just kind of bites. But yeah. So hey, Triplexity and Digital Warhead, thank you, and Jelliot, thank you for coming and hanging out today. If anybody has any questions for John, please feel free to pop them into chat, and we'll make sure we get those done. So. Um, so one of the things that I did when I was doing risk management and auditing was, do you follow any frameworks like CMMI, which for folks is like maturity model levels? Ideally everybody should be like level 3, which is, easily reproducible. It's documented, which is the big thing, I think, to get you to level 3. And, people are aware that it is a thing. Level 1 being, people know about it, but it's not documented. It's kind of haphazard and, ass wise, all over the place. And then level 2 is like, it's reproducible and people are aware of it. And that's level 3. And then 4 and 5 are like auditing and making sure that, process improvement is
Right.
happening. So do you follow those kinds of models? Do you have a maturity model of your own that you implement? I mean, ideally, you would think you'd have something like that for your own org, but I mean, do you subscribe to any of those, or why or why not?
My favorite is the risk management framework, because it's written both abstract and not abstract enough, right? It has, when you look at the risk management framework and you look at how I put it together, using monday.com, we can really extract so much more from it at a glance. And, picking any one framework, it's kind of like if you're going to build a house, you're like, well, I like all these floor plans. Eventually, you're going to have to say, we can only pick one floor plan, and it's going to be the floor plan that we're going to use for the rest of this project. Because
Right.
you need somebody to pour concrete, you need somebody to put up walls, drywall, electricity, plumbing. And so I think what a lot of orgs should do is pick one, the flavor they like, right? It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be the industry standard to start, right? Find something that's going to fit what your org is, that's understandable, that's digestible, and build it there. They all do the same thing, right? You can map the risk management to ISO 27001. You can map that to HIPAA. You can map. So it's just overlaying a series of things, right? Ultimately, what we're doing is raising the opportunity costs of an attack. That's
Right.
Any of these frameworks do that.
Right. So you mentioned, I've never heard of Monday.com, so I went and looked at it while you were on there. I posted the link in chat. It's a workflow tool. So I
It
mean,
is.
okay. I mean, is it similar to like a Jira or something where you can, I mean, it says you tracking progress and you've got monthly plannings. Looks like you could do sprint planning. Got some fancy Gantt looking charts on here and some metrics. Um,
Yeah.
look, I'm not saying it's trying to do everything here because, but I mean, it does quite a bit for that. I mean, they're not a sponsor of the stream
No.
by any way, shape, or
Yeah.
form, but what you know, it's good to have these kinds of things. But I mean, what are some examples of stuff that people might have in their own organizations already? I mean, I'm thinking Confluence or God forbid SharePoint or
Y-
whatever.
Yeah. It can really replace a variety of information management systems. What I like about it, and this is, I'm not sponsored by Monday.com. What I really like about it is it's, if you have something that's in an Excel file, you can generally put it in here and then start to make that Excel file useful. And if you want, I can share my screen of sort of like what what it looks like in when it's actually working. Um,
Most of InfoSec comes down to spreadsheets. So,
yeah,
um, yeah, everything runs on spreadsheets. It doesn't matter. Oh, so Jelly,
yeah,
I'm a big Monday.com fan myself. Jelly, why do you like Monday.com? You feel free to share your screen, John, if you'd like.
okay.
Yeah, the one I don't know why Excel spreadsheets are so nice. Maybe it's because of the ability to export to CSV, which is a parsable format, which a lot of pivot tables and stuff can easily be turned into that. Excel is also, yes, digital warhead. Excel is also where you store your passwords. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, uh, oh God, digital warhead, you're killing me.
Passwords.csv.
Yeah, exactly. Passwords.csv. Yeah, totally not my passwords.xls. Yeah, that's yeah. Um, so this is just one way of doing a risk framework. Would this also be like a GRC light? Because it seems like that there might be some GRC related items in this system.
Yeah, it can really drive any of your tech programs. This is the whole NIST 853 framework in one glance. I selected about 15 controls from all of the more than almost nearly 1,200. And we can see a couple things at a glance, right? If we were going to look at this and say, hey, across the whole, let's say we've done an engagement, right? And I found two failed controls. I shouldn't have to make a slideshow. I shouldn't have to, do these crazy things. I should be able to just tell you what control failed, who's responsible, and why. And like we can take a deep
Right.
dive into that right now without leaving the screen.
Okay.
All right, so we've got the failed controls here. I'll highlight a couple things. I kept an expense tracker, right? Like if you're working on these controls, paying for teams, maybe this is the realistic budget after your licensing and software of like this is the risk the organization could face, right, by not actually following through. So let's look at the
Right.
failed controls, and it's going to open up a new window, and we get a couple things right from the get-go. We understand what domain it's part of. We have something from previous login notification and an
Mm-hmm.
information flow. So, do we have the right people in the room? Maybe. Like, oh, okay, this person knows how to do previous logon notification, and I've included the descriptions and discussions. Right, this is a little bit difficult to get to full size for sharing, right? But like we can real quick together say, okay, this is what the description of the control is. There's some discussion questions that guide, you know, what is this about, right? This is human interface about that logon. But then we see the related controls, right? And this is where people don't think about that, right? This
Right.
AC9 has two more dependencies that nobody brought to the table, AC7 and PL4. We could dig
Hmm.
into those later,
Right.
and figure out what they are, but like it's something to think about. Um, and you want to make sure that when you start a ticket, right, does your ticket does it somewhere store these controls? And that's where you could leverage machine learning to really improve the security of your organization, right?
Right.
Because PS4, that's a whole new thing. Additionally, we can share files. This is what's great. If you and I were doing an engagement right now and you said, "Oh, I've got it on my computer," um, especially if you're doing a hash or something, right? Easy to upload.
Right.
Um, we get our updates, and then here's the fun parts, right? We can work on our requirements. We can work on the design. we could adjust our project timeline and not have to leave. We're not gonna have to back out. So and then we can assign responsible teams, right? And
Right.
so we could start to say, oh, make sure systems architecture gets this. And instead of having to back out, right, when we focus on taking risk management and identity access management, now that risk management team or that other team that we put on here, they're going to get a notification,
Right.
and we didn't have to send an email. Anyway, it drills down, it gets more granular. We can manage exceptions. So, questions? Is there something that I don't want to dominate the conversation just going line by line.
Yeah, no, somebody had said, so Jelly had said Monday.com in this case has been the right amount of features for managing projects. The only complaint is paying $60-ish a month. And I was asking, is that per seat or per license? Like if you have 100 people in your, organization and they all need a seat on this, is that expensive? So, yeah, I didn't know if that was a per seat thing or, if it's for like only PMs or if everybody can be involved with that. So,
yeah, there is a cost. They do have an enterprise model. The enterprise model is probably the most equitable. So, if you're looking to add more people, do the enterprise model. You'll get more out of the platform and even more granular security. So,
right. So to go back to the main dashboard, and I'm going to speak in generalities here because one of the things that I found interesting was expenses. Now, not being on Monday.com, let's just say you have a similar dashboard in your favorite, god awful Confluence site or it's SharePoint or what have you, and you have a dashboard for these things. Does your expenses equate to how much money it's going to cost you to implement, like to be 100% or to be complete? Or, I mean, is that in millions of dollars or thousands of dollars or what is that? Is that, is that US dollars or Bitcoin? I mean, what are we talking?
Sure. It's something I built in just to account and see, what a scope could be on a project, right? If you were to say, hey, what is an entire risk management framework implementation look like? So this could be adjusted. Right now it's a demo, and I just put in some ludicrous numbers when I was putting it together. But ideally, what I would show is, for doing this work, is it going to be a bunch of hours where we should just scope this implementation as a project, right? Especially if you're doing like a privileged solution. Hey, write that as a project. It might be $4,000 or $5,000, but the team will be there to help with that implementation, day or night for a week or whatever that is.
Right. Okay. So expenses is the man hours or the amount of money it's going to cost to be compliant. I want to flip that side of the coin for a second and go, how much will that save your company every year in terms of, because the one thing that I'm seeing here is you're like, just go in and implement ISO 27000. It's like, just. For those of you listening to the podcast here, when people say just, and he didn't, but people will say that, hey, all you got to do is just do this. They don't really understand what it means inside of an organization to do that. And I hit people on the just and the onlys a lot at work because they assume that it's really simple to do. And having done a couple of change management courses and having to deal with my own change management currently internally, it's a bitch to break through the resistance there. Just getting some of the, the one failed option in exception groups and controls may take half a year to do. So you mentioned money here. Are you meaning that like breaking down the man hours and all that stuff too? So, it's going to take $127,000 worth of man time to get that done. Cause that's that's less than one of me because I get paid about $160K a year, but that could be 3 developers or 4 security SOC analysts or something like that. I mean, if you show me this and this, you've done an assessment and, this is your dashboard and this is what you look like. And they see the 127,000 number. That's the first number they're going to see. They're going to see maybe the failed controls and they're going to see 127,000. What does that mean for them? how do you get them to buy in that, oh, we must be completely, ass over elbows and it's going to cost us $127,000 to fix this. How do you lay those fears? How do you get, well, is that better? What's this? Okay, now you've just confused me. I'm scared and I'm management and I see bigger numbers now. I'm afraid. No hurt eye, no kill eye, that kind of thing.
So, what I use the expense tab for is to show, where a project has where it has something that is starting to become a cost, if that's real or observed or not. And we can really start to look and say, okay, we have a minimum of 2, we have a maximum of 50,000. So that could be, maybe this is an appliance, maybe this is a license. So really what we have here is that sum, when we look at the very granular components of it, right? We can start to say, where is this coming from? What was that expense and why did we spend it, right? Was it on an appliance, a license, a seat? So this is an aggregate of all those costs, right? And basically, the way that I've been using this is when we go through on this part, and we're doing the estimate, right? And we're looking at, previous logon notification or whatever the control is we're doing. We can say, yeah, this is probably going to be $650 just out of
to
what,
implement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, we can at a glance say, hey, okay, so these are all the expenses for equipment license people together as we're working this program. What's the lowest cost we've got? We've got 2. What's the max? 50,000. And then how many line items do we have that have something billable? We have 28 different line items that have an entry. So, yeah.
So is this work that I don't know what your relationship is, and this is probably, I'm hoping, a fake company. You're not showing me.
This is a fake company. Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is when you go in as a contractor and go, look, it's going to cost this amount of money to help get you up to snuff, minus, not including the people in the IT department or the SOC group or the help desk folk who are going to be helping with this. And that's not assuming I have to spend a ton of meetings and write up a report and deal with your C-level folks.